Thank you for joining our session today. I'm really excited to talk to you about the art of balancing control and autonomy. My name is Missy Johnston, and what we're going to cover are team dynamics, the F word, psychological safety, and ultimately power and control. In this crazy 2020 zeitgeist, what we've been thinking about up top of mind is how to get people from good to great to awesome. How do you help teams be their best? And how do you help individuals strike that hard balance between autonomy and the control that you need to drive efficiency? We're going to talk about how you maximize agility and autonomy while maintaining that requisite control in the fallout of the COVID-19 world and beyond. It's about hearts and minds, and it's about making sure that you have the space in your environments, the empowerment, and the psychological safety to ultimately get to innovation. So with that, we have to discuss team dynamics. Team dynamics can best be thought of in a subjective way, where you can think about a team that you've actually personally really loved to work on, or a team that you know that is extremely high performing. They seem to not have any cricks in their road. Everything is smooth. They know how to argue. They know how to have good conflict, and they know how to get the productive results that they need. Now, also think of another team, a team that you would dread working on if you had to spend, another minute of your life in that team, or a team where you need something from them and you're just not getting the outcomes and the outputs that you need. All of that, good and bad, is team dynamics. What we want to do, and we want to make sure we're not too prescriptive about this, is figure out a way to get every individual person on a team motivated, inspired, productive, and high performing. Because at the end of the day, you want innovation. And you're not going to have that without the motivation and the productivity that you need. And that's what organizational effectiveness is all about. Creating high performing teams at all levels, from the C-suite down to the interns who are just starting. So how do you do that? How do you get to that innovation? And how do you ultimately optimize what agility is all about? The F word. Yes. Fail. As soon as I say fail, hopefully it triggers something in you. And that could be positive or that could be negative. But the connotation that goes along with the denotation of the F word typically triggers threat. And failure is necessary to get to innovation. So think about failure in your own personal work experiences. Has it been okay to fail? Have you gone through any tests? We're trained as you go through your studentship to not fail. You have to pass. That's the opposite of what we try to do. And it's ingrained and instilled in us to not fail. So how do you think of failure to trigger reward? Another way I like to think about your failure culture, some people call it a learning culture. But really what you're trying to get to is innovation and differentiation. And the flexibility that you need for agility requires you to be able to test things out and experiment. So look at these two images. When I think about failure and what typically happens, especially in more hierarchical organizations that have a lot of control and not very much autonomy divvied out, is that it's a shameful feeling when you fail. And there's a blame game, right? Something happened, something went wrong, something did not go right, and it triggers all of these very negative emotions in us. Whereas in a learning culture, which is truly a failure culture, you have innovation, you have machine learning, you have artificial intelligence, you're able to do those more emergent, bleeding tech transformations. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get at, is what is that right balance? And do you have the psychological safety to fail in a space where it's okay, right? You don't want outages in downtime and anything that's going to affect your MTTR, your mean time to recovery, right? But ultimately, you need to have the same space for people to be able to try things out. And so I love this quote from Brené Brown. She is a world-renowned shame researcher. And when we think about failure, that's exactly what we think about, is shame. And at the end of the day, you have to have the absence of fear You have to be secure to get to the creativity and the innovation that you need. So innovative businesses are fueled by the people in them. And there is no innovation and creativity without failure, period. So what do we need to do? We have to create intelligent failure. We have to figure out where's the right way to fail? Where is the safe space to fail? We have to make failure a part of our vernacular and vocabulary. And as you think about the environment that you are creating as leaders, and everyone is a leader, whether you are an individual contributor or you're the CIO itself, you have to think through every experience that you are creating as it relates to failure. So on the left side, right, is it a blame and shame culture where you'll hear things like, I need one throat to choke if something goes wrong? You're going to feel called to the carpet. You'll hear things like, don't fail, do your best, I wish you luck. Or people feel like it's better to do things the same way all the time because I know this is going to get rewarded. You don't want to put your head out on the line because you're going to be, brought to the chopping block. That's not the culture that you need to get to the innovation that you want. Failure is learning. And there's a really cool acronym that says, failure is basically the first step in creating the innovation that you need. And failing stands for initial learning. So when you're trying to experiment and you're trying to test and iterate, you have to be able to talk about failure in a safe way. And that ultimately means that initiative is rewarded. So in order to do that, we have to talk about empowering psychological safety. And in this way, it's best to think through it from a subjective perspective, where if you fail fast, you fail forward and you're learning from the failure. You make failure and innovation and learning a part of your actual values, and you align all the work that you do to those values. And then to hold everyone accountable, you're constantly assessing culture and assessing, are we living out those values that we actually have aspired to reach? And in assessing culture, you're really looking at feelings. It's all subjective. It's about experiences and beliefs that are going to drive the actions and results that you want. And that requires diversity. Digital has now demanded us to be able to pivot and have conversational intelligence and situational awareness like never before. And if you don't have any of these things, then you don't have a psychologically safe environment that's okay to fail. So here's how I like to think of failure. I call it a positive failure culture. And I created this acronym around an idea, because that's what you're trying to get at. You're trying to create a big idea. And it starts with innovation. Testing something out and having the space to test, and then getting that feedback and learning, right? Doing the analysis to detect the failure. That's the D. How are you taking that information and learning from it? And that's the examination. It could be exploring as well. But how do you have those conversations? Maybe it's hackathons and gamification or communities of practice, but how do you create opportunities to examine what worked, what didn't work, root cause analysis, and why? Apply that learning and continue on. If you don't do the application, you should just exit, because really you're just trying a bunch of things and you're not actually getting the ROI without the applied learning. And if it's working, then you exit. You've got incremental change that adds value. If not, you keep innovating and go back around. And that's a positive failure culture. What we found in talking about how you can do that is you need an environment where you can do the big idea, right? And it's very hard in a hierarchical. I want you to look at this continuum as the far left is least likely to have the environment that you need for agility and business agility. The far right is way off the spectrum of complete organizational chaos. You have to have the right amount of governing bodies. And so for most companies, you need to fall somewhere in the middle. As we think about org design and org structure, that is your culture. Culture is just the way you work and how you get things done. And the change leadership skill set that you need is finding that right balance And sometimes it's an adhocracy, which adapts very quickly. People feel empowered, it's multidisciplinary, and sometimes it's a little bit more left on the continuum where there's still a meritocracy, where people are selected and or placed based on their demonstrated ability over time. And sometimes that's subjective, but also it's performance based. It's not just because you're in a position of power until kingdom comes, but anyone's position or position of power can change at any point in time. Most really cutting edge and dynamic companies are trying to test holacracies and maybe do that in smaller spheres, specifically spheres, their circles of influence, and then expanding them out to broader parts of the organization as they've been able to demonstrate that they've got the right level of control within those symbiotic and interdependent teams. So if we're trying to move and balance the shift of autonomy and control away from a more hierarchical organization to something that feels a little bit more of a meritocracy or an adhocracy or the ultimate aspiration of a holacracy, we have to think about who's in the circles of influence and who has the power to make final decisions. In a hierarchical organization, you have to push things up for approval, right? And then the work comes back down. Now go out and do this. In a holacratic organization or one that has less hierarchical structure, you have circles of influence where if that most senior leader is not in that circle, they don't get to make that decision. Now, what would that feel like? And how would that feel to be on a team or in a company and in an environment where the people who are really grinding out the work have the voice of the customer, they have the budget that they need, they have everything they need, and they get to ultimately make the best decisions and live or die by them as well. It's full responsibility, but that's what comes with trust. And the way I like to think of the circles are, you've seen this movie, I think it's Meet the Parents, and they talk about the circle of trust, or maybe you haven't, but you have to be in the circle to be able to have the trust that you need. And when we talk about agility and throughput and speed, you cannot have speed without trust. And there are many talks and books and things about having the speed of trust. And you just can't get the speed that you need when you have power and control. So to boil it down, and in closing, because we're going to have an amazing panel that talks about this, there's a shift happening in organizational leadership change. And it's really moving away from blind obedience, whether it's a hierarchy or not, all the way to informed acquiescence, where I want to understand more. And so information is available throughout all levels of the company. Data is available to make decisions throughout all levels of the company, ultimately to values-based self-governance. And that's what agility is about. You want self-directing teams, you want self-governing teams, and you want people to feel empowered to make the right decisions, to fail fast, fail forward, and ultimately get to the innovation that you want.